Let's transition to our other big story, which I think everyone in the world knows that Israel hit Iran with a very strategic series of attacks that took out their top nuclear scientists, their top nuclear facilities, and some of their generals, etc. And it was a really, really well coordinated attack. Iran, of course, has counterattacked multiple times and shown that the Iron Dome is incredibly vulnerable. Although it's the best missile defense system in the world, they still got a bunch through. I think it's important to point out that Iran had very targeted hits on strategic locations, and Iran's not basically just bombing cities and civilians are dropping. I think there's a little bit of a difference there, and I pointed out, I'm not saying Iran is the good guys by any stretch. This whole conflict should have been avoided. Trump gave Iran 60 days to make a deal, and on day 61, Israel attacked. Initially, we thought that Trump was surprised by it. Trump has since come out and said, no, I knew everything that was going on. Obviously, Israel used some U.S. assets. To what degree, we still don't know, in terms of satellite technology, et cetera, to carry on the attacks. What I wanted to read was how did Israel pull off something that fantastic or that successful? And Fox News, for one of the first times in their life, did a great bit of reporting. And I want to share the story and read some of it um, because it's interesting as all heck. Title is Inside Israel's Secret War in Iran. Mossad commandos, hidden drones, and a strike that stunned Tehran. Mossad worked with a huge number of people, a massive agents deep inside Iran, operating at the highest level of penetration imaginable, says a senior Israeli security official. Going on, Israel's overnight strike on Iran was not only one of the most ambitious aerial campaigns in recent history, it was the result of years of covert planning, surveillance, and infiltration by Israeli intelligence. While dozens of fighter jets bombed nuclear and military targets across Iran early Friday morning, the groundwork had long been laid by Mossad agents working in lockstep with the Israeli military. Codename Rising Lion, I'm not going to try to pronounce the other. The preemptive operation was the product of unprecedented coordination between the Israeli Air Force, the Military Intelligence Directorate, Mossad, and the country's defense industries. For years, they worked shoulder to shoulder to gather the intelligence files needed to eliminate Iran's most sensitive military and nuclear assets. So I'll stop right there and let's sum up what they're actually saying there. There were people, Iranian people, inside the Iranian government who were working with Israeli intelligence to find out where these targets would be, when they would be there, who to hit, when to hit, etc. It was a 2-year plan. Tons of resources were thrown into this. They weren't going to throw all those years of planning away. And Israel and America, even under Trump, there's a hard line. Iran does not get a nuclear weapon. Now, in March, Trump's own National Security Council gave a report said Iran has no intention of getting a nuclear weapon. We've That's what the intelligence says. They weren't trying to do that, but they're weeks away given their capabilities and the threat because of the mullahs.
No, no, no. Hold on. That's not what the intelligence said. The intelligence did not say they were weeks away. That's what the people want you to believe. So it wasn't just an intent to do it. They were not weeks away from doing it. They've been weeks away from doing it for 40 years.
That yeah, they apparently they've created enough radioactive isotope that if they chose to actually proactively pursue one, they could probably do it in weeks away. But they've never signaled the intent to do so. In fact, they've done just the opposite.
Yeah.
That being said, we'll go to where you want to go in a second here. What I want to touch on is how interesting is it that pretty high level people in the Iranian government are more than happy to sell out the Ayatollahs And what does that mean for the Iranian people if for somehow we could actually get a regime change there? I think it might be great for the Iranian people, but more importantly, Israel put out a list years ago of about 7 countries that needed to be toppled. And there was like Libya, Syria, Kuwait, Iraq, Iran. Iran's the last of them. All the other ones have had a regime change. And that's what really stands out to me is this is the last
Wesley
one.
Clark put that out too.
Yeah, do you have that list with the name of the countries? Because they're all, I was looking for it. I didn't find it quickly.
Yeah. So um, I also want to point out the people, there's a lot of Jewish people in Iran.
Second
Um,
largest Jewish
it
population.
isn't. I looked. That is not true.
Oh, wait, hold on. Alpha put it out. Was it Alpha? No, it was CanCon put it out that it was the second largest Israeli population in the world. I corrected him on his Twitter account because I looked it up. It's very easy to find. And it depends if we consider Turkey part of the Middle East or not. But
Yeah.
obviously, Israel's number one, Turkey's number two, and Iran would be number three in the Middle East. And
Yeah.
CanCon took the correction with good humor.
Yeah. So they don't have to be high up either. I just want to make sure everybody understands that. There are people that are mid tier gatekeepers that have access to information. And depending, like what we've seen here, you can have this person that is sitting in a protocol office outside of the defense minister's office. It's going to know where the defense minister is all the time. They don't have to be high ranking. They just have to be disloyal.
That's a valid point. I think when it comes to the nuclear secrets, they probably have a little bit better connection, but your point's valid either way.
Yeah. Um, so, uh, hold on. I was going to find that Wesley Clark quote.
Yeah, go ahead and pull that up. And this is why invited Ghost to Base Patrick Henry on here, Ghost to Base Patrick Henry on for the show tonight because, again, Middle East history is his forte. He does it really well. He's done a ton of research. Everyone goes, well, where did this conflict start? And I'd say, you want to go back 4,000 years?
Yeah.
Because it really has been going on a long time. The issue is Israel's got these hardliners. And when I say hardliners, you look at, you can see this all the time when they're public. They show up with a map of what's called Greater Israel, which includes um, Palestine, the Palestinian areas as well as part of Jordan. What they call Greater Israel is territory they don't currently occupy. And they use that as a map on public appearances. These hardliners in Israel they're the true Jewish supremacists. They are exactly what they are Zionists. You talk about the illegal occupation, these young people that go out there and occupy what's considered part of Palestinian territory and fight to keep it. And these are religious zealots who are the only people that get exemptions from service in the IDF. They do not have military service, yet they're the ones starting a lot of the conflict. These are Netanyahu's biggest supporters. His opposition is, I've got nothing against the Jewish people whatsoever. I've got a ton against the Israeli government. They've acted irresponsibly since their formation.
But to give you an example that's more probably relatable to people here, it would be like the Church of Scientology going in and setting up camp on Indian reservations. That's literally, it's not property that's theirs. They can't annex it. It's not theirs. And they're zealots. They're people that, and if you could wrap your head around, that's basically what these people are doing under the name and under the protection of some cloak of we're your ally. Well, you're not doing anything for us but getting us into war after war after war. So let me name those countries: Iraq, Syria, Lebanon,
Check,
Libya,
check,
Somalia,
check,
Sudan,
check.
and then Iran.
Yeah.
So let me just add something to your brief history of Iran. I want everybody to understand there's a lot of controversy and people will try to mislead you in what happened with the Shah was quote unquote king in Iran. They decided that they were going to implement a democracy that was set up basically like a British prime minister and a Congress or parliament type of a system. And the very first election they ever had, they elected Mossadegh as the prime minister, and the Shah was kind of just going to be a figurehead, kind of like the British throne is in England. And Mossadegh tried to renegotiate with BP to get more for the money, because while they had been basically a protectorate of the crown, they had an oil deal that allowed the Brits to take 86 cents of every dollar and leave only 14 cents in the country of Iran for the profit. And that's very important. It wasn't total, it was profit. And Mossadegh, because they had like less than single, they had, I want to say it was 14% literacy rate at the time. There had been no schools built for the people in Iran, nothing. And so Mossadegh needed some money, and he wanted to renegotiate that. Plus, Aramco had just got a 50-50 deal. Venezuela had just gotten a 50-50 deal, and that's what Mossadegh asked for. And the British told him no. And when he worked with their Congress, Parliament, and nationalized the oil company, since the British refused to negotiate with him, the British tried to overthrow him. And when they failed, they hired basically the CIA through Standard Oil, and Standard Oil ended up with the other 35%. The British never got better than 50%, and why they wouldn't deal with Mossadegh, but instead they sent Kermit Roosevelt over to overthrow Mossadegh. And so Mossadegh is in house arrest for the rest of his life, and in back walks the Shah. And the Shah they hired Major General Norman Schwarzkopf Sr. to set up the National Police Force, which was basically a terrorist organization called the Savak. And when Norman Schwarzkopf trained the people to be in the Savak, they trained them like the School of Americas. They trained them how to kidnap people, how to torture people, to keep people in line. The Shah was corrupt. The people did not like him. He was cruel. He unleashed the Savak on anybody that tried to say anything that was not very flattering of the Shah. So in comes 1979. The CIA is looking for a way to get Jimmy Carter out of office, and we have the quote unquote overthrow of the Shah, because the Shah at that point they were literally having uprisings in Iran, just like in Cuba. They knew with the corrupt Batista that they had installed in Cuba that there's going to be a revolution, but they want to have one that they control. So the installation, or the quote unquote revolution in Iran of the mullahs, was a controlled demolition of the Shah's administration. It was crafted by the CIA. It was controlled by the CIA. And the fact that they left the Savak in place as their national police that was full of CIA trained people tells you all you need to know about the government of the mullahs.
If I may, before you keep going, there's a couple of other interesting data points about that. Is the director of the CIA in 1975-76 was none other than George H.W. Bush. When the Iran hostage crisis is going on, Carter tried to initiate a rescue mission, and it did not work at all. It never got off the ground for the most part. And there's a pretty obvious speculation that the CIA kept that from happening because they absolutely wanted Carter out of office because of the Halloween massacre when he fired a third of the CIA. Say what you want about Jimmy Carter. I thought he was a terrible president, but he's one of the very few presidents post-World War II that was not controlled by this foreign policy complex, which is the military industrial complex, NATO, the CIA, State Department. They don't care if it's a Republican or Democrat as long as they control them. And there's been three exceptions to that rule. And that was JFK, Jimmy Carter, and Donald Trump. And the CIA has gone after all three.
And so the October surprise of the 1980 election was the supposedly Jimmy Carter had already been working with several people in Iran to release the hostages, and the George Bush, Alexander Haig, and several others go over and convince them and tell them that they're going to ship them missiles, which they absolutely is against the law to do at the time. And that's why this is very important to today's conversation. So the they say, we're going to give you missiles after the election if you hold the hostages over until after the election. So not only do they hold the hostages over till after the election, they release them on Inauguration Day, and there is a shipment of missiles. And where did those missiles come from? Those missiles came from Israel. Those missiles were funded through the CIA, um, and they were created in Israel and shipped to Iran. So yes, I just said that Israel was supplying Iran with missiles. That was the first of two shipments. The next shipment happens during the Iran-Contra, where they're raising money, in addition to the drug money they were always already using to fund the Contras. The CIA gets with Israel again, and they become a weapons trafficker to Iran with a second shipment of missiles into Iran. And so all of those missiles were reverse engineered, and the missiles up until about 5 years ago that Iran used everywhere was from that initial stock, those two initial shipments, because they were able to reverse engineer US missiles to wreak havoc. And so you've got the mullahs in charge that had some deal because they were harboring bin Laden at certain points during the whole post 9/11 thing as well. So there was an arrangement. We don't know a lot about it. We probably won't know a lot about it for 30 years until they get around to declassifying it. But there was a lot of arrangements made with the mullahs in Iran as it relates to the CIA. They are not some untouchable entity. But what you have now is there is a coalition inside of Iran that doesn't like the Shah, and they don't like the mullahs either. And they want their freedom. And that's where we are today. What I would love to believe is that taking out some of the people that they did was, I have no evidence of this at all, but was eliminating some of the people that were the hardliners that were propping up the mullahs. Because as we found out during the Obama administration, when you had those uprisings in Iran to throw off the mullahs, who stopped it? Obama. Obama stopped an indigenous uprising in Iran to overthrow the mullahs because they're controlled.
And that's a good time to point out that what's really interesting about the timing of that is that's right around the time of the Arab Spring, which
Yes.
was something that was instigated by this whole regime change coalition we talk about, where the NGOs, the CIA, Voice of America, etc., help throw tons of money at ideas to create the appearance of a popular uprising in countries all, including Egypt, by the way, countries all over the Middle East. That's why they call it the Arab Spring. And that's actually, in my opinion, the trigger because it got right onto Russia's doorstep. They were doing these regime change. That's what killed the whole Russian reset that, the Clinton State Department was trying to, they're doing, not Kosovo. What was the name of the scientific,
Um, Hold on, I'll tell you.
I know exactly what it is. There was a scientific Russian American
It was Silicon
Skolkovo.
Valley.
Skolkovo, the Russian Silicon Valley
Skolkovo.
Skolkovo. Skolkovo.
Skolkovo.
Yeah, and because our U.S. Defense Department said, no, you're giving away too much of our technology, and that's kind of how they developed their hypersonic missiles, according to some, according to Scott Ritter, who's a pretty good source on it. Um, but this is the Arab
So the
Spring.
one country that was not allowed to have an Arab Spring was Iran.
And coincidentally, didn't Obama have some people with some serious Iranian connections in his
Like
cabinet?
Valerie Jarrett,
And how
Uma
about
Abedin,
John Brennan, the head of the CIA?
John Brennan, Peter Strzok, all of them.
And then you've got Huma Abedin, who just got married yesterday, by the way. Congratulations, Huma, to marry Alex Soros. Just happened yesterday. Starting to see some connections here. Yeah. So Obama wanted the mullahs to stay in power.
Correct.
Um, this ties into the Muslim Brotherhood. It's got to take us back to how the Middle East got carved up in such a ridiculous fashion. This goes back to the British after World War One. Why was World War One fought? One of the major reasons was to break up the Ottoman Empire, and it had to do with the Suez Canal in Egypt. But also, oil had just been discovered in the Middle East,
Yep.
and the British, the English, wanted to carve this up. So British Petroleum, Royal Dutch Shell, which is another big player here we don't hear too much about. But just remember that the British crown are Dutch. William of Orange, when they installed him in 1688, came from the Netherlands. Um, Royal Dutch Shell is involved, and of course, Standard Oil, or it had been broken up by them, but it's still run by the same people for the
Right.
ostensibly.
The Rockefellers.
Yes, the Rockefellers. That's who carved up the Middle East, so they would always have continued strife. So you could always have cheap labor because they never had a developed economy, and therefore you could exploit their resources time and time again. And that's what's been going on since 1919 in the Middle East after the fall of the Ottoman Empire.
Absolutely. And you have to create the, in order for the strategy of tension to work, you have to have fault lines. And so they drew up, and in the aftermath of World War One, they actually created fake royal families um, that installed were installed as if they had been, for the last 500 years, the royal family, which was not in fact true at all.
Well, the thing that created that's the worst was the Muslim Brotherhood, which is the basically the foref- foundation of this entire radical Islam movement. I mean, look, Islam, you have the built-in strife between Sunnis and Shias, and we're not going to fix that in our lifetime. That's just a fundamental difference. But the Muslim Brotherhood took it to a new level, and you start talking about all these different splinter groups that the CIA's exploited, whether it was in Afghanistan to fight the Soviets, what have you. These radical Islamists all flow downhill from the Muslim Brotherhood, and that's where the Obama connection gets really interesting.
And of course, the Muslim Brotherhood was brought into Egypt by the British.
Of course, and it's the divide and conquer tactics that these ruling families have been using for centuries, and they're very good at it. So
Yes,
and if you want to talk about divide and conquer, this whole right-left divide in America, it's a false narrative. It's always
correct.
designed to keep us at each other's throats. Right versus left is false. It's designed to keep us from looking up and seeing who's really pulling the puppet strings.
Yeah, and I have come to the conclusion that people that generically use the terms right and left are intellectually lazy. They do that in order to perpetuate a CIA talking point of division, and I don't participate in that any longer. When we do our book reviews, I use the language that is written in the book, but I clarify each and every time what they're actually talking about.
Yeah, the way we've, Doug, Douglas V. Gibbs, of course, and the people, everyone in here knows Douglas V. Gibbs and Mr. Constitution. He's a regular host on this hour at this time period slot. We've talked about this quite a bit. The far left is 100% government. The far right is 0% government. That's anarchy. Well, 100% government is everything from monarchy to communism to state socialism to fascism. Fascism's far left, it always has been. What the founding fathers tried to do was get us, the other way of describing the far right is 100% liberty, is anarchy. The problem with anarchy is you have no law and order and you can't have a life. So what the founding fathers tried to do is get as much individual liberty and freedom on the far right and still maintain order. So let's say they put the Articles of Confederation at 10%. They found out very quickly that they needed a little bit more government than that because the central government couldn't put down things like the Shays Rebellion. They couldn't keep states from tariffing and taxing each other. It was the Union was going to fail. So they met in Philadelphia, uh, ended up writing the Constitution, which got ratified, which was supposed to be just a little bit more government than the Articles of Confederation. And the Anti-Federalists told us, that what you did is gave too much, these two new branches of government, the executive and the judicial, are going to keep seizing power away from the legislature. And as our legislature has been corrupted by these multinational corporations run by these multi-generational families, most of them, the blue bloods from New England, the Yankees, and later on the Cowboys from the South, you see what you have today, where our government is 100% a faux democracy, which we're never supposed to be, but run by these multinational corporations for the sole purpose of exploiting the resources of the entire world.
Correct. Yeah, it's been captured.
Mhm. Yeah, which means they have to have control of everything, the institutions, education, the state, city, local governments, all these NGOs, charities, etc. You know, the education system, and almost most importantly, the media. And they've done that. And they've done that because, again, once again, they've legislated themselves so many financial advantages that, you know, new money can't come in and compete. When it does, they co-opt it. You know, you get an Elon Musk out there, if he's legitimately, you know, grassroots new money, he'd get co-opted at some point in time or taken out. And we've seen this time and time again.
Yep.
So what do you think happens with Iran and Israel going forward? Do we have a chance at peace without this escalating?
So I don't know. I don't do forecasting. What I there's going to be a peace deal at some point, but it is not going to happen until after Netanyahu is gone. So that to me is the next shoe to fall. There cannot be peace with Netanyahu at the helm of Israel. There just cannot be.
And Netanyahu's backed by the hardliners that we talked about earlier. If Netanyahu ever leaves power, he's facing criminal charges. So he's got every incentive, just like Zelensky does in,
That's what I was going to say. He and Zelensky are buddies.
yeah, they've got a lot in common. If either one of them ever gets out of power, they're facing criminal charges. And that's with Zelensky, it's hypothetical. With Netanyahu, their judiciaries, they can't charge him right now because he's prime minister or whatever the title is. Second he's out of office, he's getting charged for all kinds of bribery and other charges. They've already been written. And
Yes.
yeah, yeah, the guy's only been in power for what's it's like 1993, and he's
Yeah, there's been a couple interims there, but yeah, and everything about him's fake. I mean, that's not even his real name. His dad was part of a terrorist organization as the precursor to Israel. Everything about his background, um, you know, his brother getting killed. I actually did a paper on his brother when I was at Air War College in the daring rescue. I now the Yom Kippur. I now wonder what that was all about. I haven't had an opportunity to go back and relook at it based on all of this new information. But yeah, it's just all everything that we thought we knew about our history is not in fact true. So
Orwell said, "He who controls the past controls the future. He who controls the present controls the past. They rewrite the history. The victors write the history. And if you don't know where you're coming from, you can't learn from the lessons from the past, nor can you see what the ruling class did in the past to justify getting where they were." It's important.
yeah,
And I think that's why, you know, I've beaten this drum nonstop, and I'll do it again. You know, I talk about we're living during Gutenberg 2.0. All of these people on the internet that do the research and bring you real history and, you know, hammer it out to find out what's real and what isn't. And we look at source documents, we look at everything like that. This is how you beat the official narrative, which because we've been lied to for a long, long time. And I'm not going to give you a starting date for when it happened. Well, no, it's interesting. I'll tell the story again because I think it's an important point. The powers that be always had a monopoly on information going back to feudalism. You know, the only people who could actually read would be the nobility and the clergy. The average person couldn't even read the Bible. They were illiterate. So you had to rely on what the church told you the Bible said. And we know from history that they probably weren't always all that accurate, and they probably made a lot of mistakes. Um, I seem to remember a few witch trials and other purges that happened. Gutenberg invents the printing press, and all of a sudden, people from one village knew what was going on in another village. All of a sudden, the average person could read the Bible. You knew what was going on around the world. And this free market exchange of ideas from that exploded the Renaissance and the Reformation, and it changed the world. And out of that, we had these great thinkers like John Locke, etc., that talked about freedom, individual liberty, natural rights, etc. And from that stemmed the American Revolution and this great experiment about self-determination and could we rule ourselves without a monarchy? And a lot of the Europeans predicted we would fail. Um, seems that the monarchies failed instead. We somehow we've created such a strong document of the Constitution. We've survived all these shenanigans that's been done to us. But the powers that be who lost that control of information, and information is everything. If you control the information, you control everything. They lost control of it. You know, in 1776, people could speak freely. We had pamphlets, and that free exchange of ideas liberated the entire, well, a lot of the world. The free exchange of ideas started to change in the 20th century. The radio comes out, and it was an instant. Well, first of all, we had the newspapers. Newspapers started to get more nationalized as industrialization happened. We're getting modernized. One of the great examples I can give you is in 1914, leading up to World War One. J.P. Morgan bought up 30 Eastern Seaboard newspapers for the sole purpose of propagandizing the American involvement in World War One, something the American population wanted nothing to do with. We absolutely did not want to join. But he buys these newspapers to convince us to go to the war, and guess what? One false flag later, and we're at war. Then we get radio as the next big means of communication, and that was an instant monopoly, RCA. The radios were controlled by one or two or three corporations, and now they have control of the information again. Then we have television. We had the same natural monopoly. And a result of those monopolies were the bloodiest century in world history, World War I, World War II, Korea, etc. It was not a good thing to have the powers that be have the monopoly on information. Then they come up with the internet, originally used, it's a DARPA government contractor invention, and then they released it to the public because they realized they could use this internet in other countries to let them share information so they could do their grassroots, air quotes, color revolutions. Well, unfortunately for the deep state or the powers that be, that genie got out of the bag, and we learned how to communicate and have a free exchange of ideas again. And things like 2015 and 16, like Brexit and Trump getting elected, set them into a panic, and we entered the age of censorship. And the battle right now is over who controls the flow of information. And the news is we're winning. People are waking up every single day. They're realizing they've been lied to by the system. The system is not as it's been portrayed to us. And it's because of shows like this, websites that we all visit, people like the Colonel, Ghost, if he'd been here. We're telling the truth and letting people decide for themselves. And Trump won the 2024 election for almost one reason more than any other is because of the under 25 male vote. It completely shifted away from Democrats. The youth has always voted Democrat. And my theory is that happened because these guys grew up with a phone in their hand and they can fact check their teachers faster than their teacher can lie to them. And these people, I mean, these 25 and under, this Gen Z, they have a chance to be the best generation ever if they keep on the path they're going. And I love what they're doing. Because you can't lie to them. They can fact check you and they know how to discern what's true and what's not. They know which websites to go to. They know where they've been lied to. And they've been screwed over. They lost 2 years of their lives to COVID. They were told that they should be, they should be a girl. The boy and a girl is no difference. This generation was absolutely brutalized by this sick woke ideology. But I think they're also going to be our savior. And it's the internet that did it because we're living through Gutenberg 2.0. And that's how we win this incredible battle, at least for this round.
Can I go back to Netanyahu for a second?
Please.
It's very interesting how it takes us back to the beginning of the show. Netanyahu was born in 1949 in Tel Aviv. His mother, Tazila Siegel, was born in the Ottoman Empire area, which is modern day Jerusalem. Her family had migrated there from Minneapolis in 1911, having relocated there from Lithuania in the 1870s. So we started off in Minneapolis, and I didn't realize that Netanyahu's mother had spent time in Minneapolis as well. That's hilarious.
No, I never heard that. And we've been talking about Lithuania a bit in our secret societies, but I won't digress there.
Yeah,
Lots of interesting things came out of Lithuania.
very interesting things.
Well, we've got about 7 minutes to close up, more like five, because I think if the gals come in, we'll have a quick chat with them, let them take over the last 2 minutes. But Colonel, this has been fantastic. Thanks for coming on and helping me out with the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It was a very interesting show, and I do think that providing the backdrop of current events while you're talking about current events is so important. It gives you kind of the long story where we have been grown. We grew up on sound bites. Sound bites always are misleading, and that's how you get propagandized. If you can take the current events and capture them from a historical perspective on why they make sense and what some of the nuances are to them that you're not going to find in the mainstream media, I think it's critically important.
I agree very much so. One of the interesting things is how, I told you a little bit at the beginning how the Colonel and I met, but what's funny is how we agree on so much, and our research come from totally different directions. I was always follow the money. I started as a Wall Street guy and started tracing the money, and it got me to the Federal Reserve, and I wanted to know who founded that, and it led me to the same darn conclusions as the Colonel found, starting with Operation Gladio. So we ended up right in the middle, and
Well,
there's very little we don't agree on.
and actually, mine started a long time ago with my military history because having spent 30 years in the military and I have a degree from Air War College, I've done a lot of military history and I contextualize everything based on that experience. And like you said, when I ran across Operation Gladio, it fit in no hole in my education. And I'm like, what is that? Why have I not heard about it? And so, just to share real quick with the audience, I